Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do here, you can head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we typically answer your questions around media and virtual events. And our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be talking about RFPs, requests for proposals, and that whole sales process and how you can submit bids. So you want to stay tuned for our second hour. And to our producers, we invite you to go ahead and submit your questions to give our panelists enough time to give you the best answers possible. Well, it sounds like it's time to start our show, Bill. Let's go.
All right, Liberty, thank you. First question comes today from Stan Chan in San Francisco, California. Stan says, what's the best way to record and playback video of developers reviewing their code in a live stream and or Zoom session?
Right back to you, Bill.
Well, and the answer to this in part is to take some tips from what Apple does. And I'm speaking specifically of the Worldwide Developer Conference. Every year they have a large gathering of all the people who develop for them. And one of the things they feature are videos of the presentations. Many of those presentations involve software designers and engineers and coders reviewing their code live. And these are some of the smartest people in the world. So if you look at that for examples of how you can dive into a code stream, look at the comments, bring it up, come back to a presenter and talk about it. They really are pretty masterful at this. Now, obviously, they have tremendous budgets and they can pull out all the stops in terms of graphic designers and lots of people to make sure everything looks good. But they do an outstanding job of that. I've watched maybe a half a dozen of those. I'm not really interested in the coding, but I'm interested in how videos get produced. And one aspect of that is they make the code, particularly comments and callouts and things they want to direct your attention to, very colorful. So I'm used to seeing a lot of code as just lots of monocolor lines in a big stream that coders understand. They do call out things and then refer to them and go close up on the code and then come back. So it's just worth watching a few of those to get some ideas of how they do it at that level.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, one of the things I think Apple does really well is we can talk about in WWDC they have we're going to talk about a concept, then we're going to talk about a code snippet that's going to be in Keynote or something like that, and there's going to be descriptions of what that means. Then it might actually open the code and do something. Now, I admit that Apple doesn't actually show coding very often, live. It's mostly a lot of Keynote documents, but when they do that, or if they do that, the big thing is that what's hard about code is understanding where you're at. And so having the 10,000 foot view, an explanation about what you're about to do, and then doing it, I think makes a huge difference in being able to do that.
Okay, Peter.
So I'll go back. I'm going back to the original question. I mean, we've done this, used to do this with work every once in a while. We were big believers in setting some standards around an editing application called BB Edit, which will, in fact, do what Bill was talking about, will highlight words in different colors if it sees certain phrases and certain command structures so that you can see what's going on. But then, frankly, Alex and Bill, we used QuickTime to capture the screen.
Can you talk us through that, Peter? So you said that you use QuickTime. So QuickTime has the function of capturing the screen, anything that's on your screen or anything in a particular window. And you can, if you're editing and wanting to walk through the code, you can say you can basically talk to it, record your voice and while you're walking through the code. So that's, I mean, code reviews are, to say they're dry is it's probably closer to the Sahara Desert. I will point that out to everyone. I mean, they are, but the other way we've done it, I did one right before I retired. We just did it on Zoom and we recorded the Zoom session and shared our screen. Okay, wonderful.
But again, the key thing there is, back to Bill's point, if you've just got the monochrome listing, your eye's going to have a fit trying to keep track of where you are reading the code. So we use coloring built into BB Edit to to highlight certain structures in the code itself, I should say, so you can see what you're talking about.
Next question.
Next one comes from Bob Sturdivant. Sorry about that. San Antonio, Texas. And Bob says, referring to Alex's showcase of the AI artwork yesterday, what is the licensing use of the pictures that are generated by those two systems?
Go ahead, Courtney.
To be decided, because artificial intelligence is pretty new, and the legal system and intellectual property doesn't really know how to deal with an artificial intellect. And so it depends. Right now, the lawyers are saying that if you trained that AI system with copyrighted material, then you may have some kind of copyright claim. I don't know how they're ever going to enforce that, to know what sources that artificial intelligence used to compile that visual image from. Only if it's recognizable, or let's say if you put in the description, show me something that looks like a Hockney painting, or who's the guy that painted all the little cottages by the stream? That guy, he's the most popular of the submissions for the training for artificial intelligence. So they've yet to prove all of that stuff in court, and it's going to be yet to be decided. Right now, I think you can use it pretty much without too much problem, as long as the intellectual property engine, as long as the AI engine says that they used open source or copyright-free images to train the thing, then you should be home free.
Alex?
And do I sound okay now?
Yes,
yeah,
you do. Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that. As far as specific rights, granted, I know Midjourney, which is the one that I've been fiddling with, grants. It says you own everything that you make. They're not trying to own any of the things that are being created there. Now, Courtney brings up a bigger legal issue that may rear its head once people start making money with it. But right now, the individual AI system is not holding on to any of that.
And Jason?
I can't think of a clearer idea for fair use, right? Go back to the hot dog, not a hot dog notion, right? Like the idea that Oscar Mayer would somehow have, a copyright claim against the training of the hot dog, not a hot dog, is absurd. But then again, it wouldn't surprise me one day waking up and reading on Twitter that the AI has enlisted an AI agent and is now demanding royalties.
Next question.
Next question comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and he wonders, what's the difference between Apple Cash and Apple Pay and Apple Wallet?
Go ahead, Bill.
So the Apple Wallet application is a part of iOS where you can put in all sorts of credit cards or other financial payment processes, and it basically stores linkages to all of those. Now, Apple Cash and Apple Pay, the basic difference between them is Apple Cash is a front-loaded, you send them money, and that Apple Cash, or other people send you money through email or something like that, that goes into a repository, and you can draw on that or transfer it to your bank or whatever. Apple Pay is linked to some funding source from you, a credit card or something like that, and it is basically a way to just tap into your regular lines of credit. The last one, of course, is the newest, and that's the Apple Credit Card, which is a formal credit card run by a banking operation that kind of takes you into that system. Everybody understands that Apple has so much cash they're sitting on, part of them is becoming a bank almost. And so, but these are just various financial products that you can tap into through Apple. And the plus for them is that they're integrated across all of your Macs, and there's a lot of security built into the system, and it's purely for convenience.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a space that we want to watch. Apple is slowly finding its way to being a bank. I think that's where we're where we're going to find ourselves most likely is Apple. You're already kind of banking it. Like I just move a bunch of money into Apple Pay, and then I just kind of live in Apple Pay. I don't really because it's all tracked, it's all there. It's instantly approved. I don't have to provide any number that's connected to my home stuff. So and generally, what's going to happen, I think, is you're seeing all the stuff going. Apple is the only company in the world that's positioned to create a completely closed circle, which is that they have lots of people who want to buy products from them that need credit, and they have lots of people who would probably put their money in. I mean, the problem is that what Apple's really good at is disrupting bad businesses. So someone who comes up with a good technology and a bad business model, and the bad business model are banks. Banks are a bad business model. They are intrusive, painful, ruthless, things that we have to deal with. And as consumers, we're ready to jump. Most people are ready to leave most of I have actually a pretty good one, but it's a credit union. But the banks, most people would leave. A lot of Apple users specifically would very quickly move to an Apple bank if they were given the opportunity. Now, doing that has all kinds of regulatory issues, and I think Apple is moving very slowly. But what Apple's doing is putting what you're seeing, all the mechanisms being added that would be required. And at that point, they could literally be taking money, savings from one client and loaning it to another, to a customer, and they literally wouldn't necessarily need any outward input. So it's very efficient and very, very fascinating. Again, there's all kinds of regulatory issues with that. There's all kinds of, it'll terrify people to because once Apple starts going down that path, it's very hard to stop, so because you can't unwind something once everybody's savings is in there.
Jason?
If I were to be succinct about that, Apple Pay is the payment tokenization process by which, any credit card can be turned into a one-off kind of tokenized thing. Apple Cash is the way that Apple parks cash for that tokenization, and Apple Wallet is the secure enclave in which all these things are housed.
Oh, yeah, that was succinct. Thank you, Jason. Courtney?
Yeah, Jason described it, and Bill described it really quite well. As far as Alex, turning into a bank, I don't necessarily see Apple doing that because they've got enough problems with their own, where they're storing their own money, to be storing somebody else's money. They get into a lot of international banking regulations problems that they may have to adhere to if they do that. I was going to say, if Apple, I don't use Apple Pay or Apple Wallet. I use Google Pay and Google Wallet, which is, I assume, almost exactly the same thing. The other thing, good use of the Google Wallet is it's a secure enclave, as Jason said. So you can store other things other than cash in there. You can store a list of your credit cards, any kind of health information, or my vaccination status. All that can be saved in your Apple Wallet as a secure image that you can bring up at any moment on your mobile device and use it for identification or anything like that. So it's a secure enclave that can be used for other things other than cash. And Apple Pay uses NFT technology, near field technology, not the non-fungible technology, to communicate that information to a pay console at anybody who accepts Apple Pay or Google Pay. And
back to you, Jason.
I wanted to make one clarification. Secure Enclave is actually something very specific in the processors of iOS devices, and I guess now Apple devices, that doesn't necessarily directly store your Apple Pay information. So that is separate. It is a secure enclave, but when you hear something on MacBreak Weekly about the secure enclave, that's not exactly this.
And one thing to look at is that, one thing for us to track, just to watch as we talk about this, is the concept of a quote unquote physical or absolute digital persona, which is that you are who you are in the system. And there's only one of you, and you're individual, and we can identify you, and you can verify. And you're looking at, as Apple starts to move, push passwords out, to now that would be super painful and creepy if you didn't absolutely cut off any way to track it, so that you don't become this trackable token. And so what you're seeing Apple do is the first step, which is to basically cut everybody else out of being able to have that absolute persona, but then they're going to provide it, I think, to Apple users. And what that means is that there won't be any passwords. When you say that you are who you are, you can basically get to a point where you say, I don't want the phone to ring from someone who isn't verified. And then all the scamming and everything else goes away. And I think that's where they're going.
And we'll wrap with you, Courtney.
Yeah, like Alex said, the biometric identification is going to become a requirement. It already is on some of these, since Apple Pay and Google Pay and Samsung Pay all use NFT. You can just wave your phone to pay for stuff. You have to be able to be logged into that phone with a biometric fingerprint or a face ID or something before it will unlock that. And that's going to become a requirement in the future for all those. Because I always worry about, if you lose your phone, somebody picks it up and, they can pay for anything they want to if they can log into my phone. So that's a worry.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Again, this time he says, how about office hours building an instant feedback mechanism that monitors the satisfaction level of producers who ask questions in real time while the answers to their questions are being given?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it was there. I got to figure out. I'll talk to Chris about it. There was a feature there where you could heart an answer as it went through. I think that this gets into whether we want claps or other things like that. Like the little hearts that go up the side and all the fun little things there. We're not going to do that. I'm just kidding. There are very few things I hate more than all those stupid little emojis that go flying out across the bottom of a Facebook event.
I do it all for the hearts.
Gosh, it's just the most horrible thing. Anyway, so yeah, that's never going to happen. But what we may do, what we started to do, and again, I right now there's a reply button, but and maybe you can see it on your end. Maybe I just don't see it on our event chat on the back end. So try to heart something, but you should be able to roll over the question, and there should be a heart there that you can. Not a lot of people use it. It was kind of added, and we haven't really rolled it out. But I think that I am interested in. I don't think the real-time thing is something that we can manage in 2 minutes. But I do think that we need to have something where eventually, as a knowledge base, it's useful to hear from the producers to say, yeah, that was a great answer to that question, or that was a whatever, so that you could search it. And then if we've answered it 10 times over the last 2 years, you can sort those by that area. So that metadata is important. But I thought we had a heart on the chat, but on the answers, but it might have disappeared in some update. So I'll take a look. We weren't using it heavily.
Go ahead, Bill.
What scares me is the thought that those political people who give you the dial things, and while some politician is bloviating on screen, people turn up or down the dials. If you ever implement that in office hours, I'm out of here because my whole life will be crushed as my numbers go down in real time.
Well, I mean, if you look at there's a bunch of mechanisms that have to be added to the system to make it valid. One of them is looking at repeated or group action and being able to trace that back. And then you basically start, producers that work in unison often would probably be considered less important. Into the system. Right now, the problem is everybody's considered the same in most of these systems. And what we would do is basically, build systems that basically defeat group behavior. And that's not that hard to do. It's hard to do when you're a big company and you haven't done it before. When you're a little group, you can actually build all kinds of things that are pretty rough, and that because all we care about is good conversation. We're not trying to be fair. So people are acting out. You can just say, well, those votes aren't as important as the other ones. So
next question.
The next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Steve Jobs allegedly tried to have the crew sleep in the building before the iPhone launch because he was concerned about leaks. How would you charge for those extra nights? Would you insist on the client provide food and ask for a per diem?
Or a lot more? Jason?
Well, in that specific case, I don't think Steve Jobs would care what you thought because it was, he saw it as his life's work. And, there's you're going to sleep there or you're going to find another job. But as a rule, I don't know. I feel like if you're part of anything that's important enough where there's a legitimate concern of leaks, bring your teddy bear and stay for the night.
Courtney?
Having worked on a lot of publicity stuff for Apple, national television advertising for about 10 or 11 years. I worked under all those non-disclosure agreements, and we did have to have meetings where they would unveil the new upcoming product that has not been revealed publicly, because we would have to photograph it and make it dance and do all the magic things it does in the television commercials. And we'd have to figure all that stuff out with prototypes. So, we build full union days with all of the vacation and holiday, meal penalty, everything else on those days that we were required, when we weren't shooting, just required to analyze the product and figure out the product and figure out how we were going to present the product and the commercials. Those were all fully billable union days. And everything was covered by non-disclosure agreement, which probably still exists today. So I'm going to have to kill you all. So
go ahead, Bill.
Well, it's an interesting thing to me because there's two sides to this. One is the secrecy. I mean, he did have a product that would go on to change the face of a lot of society. At the same time, you're doing team building, and that's another piece. So you're trying to be cohesive and, hope that everybody is as interested in not leaking this potentially fundamental changing message that you're about to deliver, hopefully, to the world. It's difficult, I would think. I would imagine there was tons of anxiety before that. I mean, I can't imagine knowing that I had something and not only had the something, but had crafted and scripted a way to present it. I still remember in my mind, so it's a phone, it's a thing, it's these three devices, and then revealing the fact that it was one device that did all three things. That was a hugely important moment of communication, that something like that I had never quite seen before. And that had the effect that it was looking for. So you don't want to diminish that.
And we also have to think about how far back this was too, like at the beginning of iPhone launches. Alex?
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting is that I work on a lot of keynotes, and a lot of people think that their product is something that everybody's trying to figure out what they're doing and everything else, and rarely is that the case. Like it's and you're still quiet about it. You don't talk about it. You don't say anything. You don't breathe it out. You don't. And but at the same time, you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be something that everyone's really. But everybody at Apple knew that this was going to be a big deal. Like they all. And what was funny was that the cell companies thought that there's all these rumors of the quote unquote iPhone, and they were like, well, that's not going to. That's not going to be competitive. And that's when they I think of that every single time, like when the iPod came out and all these MP3 players already existed, and when the phone came out and all the stuff, when the watch came out and all this, they were like, well, they're not going to really figure out the watch. And I often think about that when I think about cars and AR and banks. Like a lot of people have said that Apple can't turn something over before, and they're usually pretty good at it.
And Peter.
Well, I was just going to put a slightly different twist on this. There were times in my past life where we were testing and somebody else was filming some interesting equipment that, shall we say, just required us to stay on base for a couple of weeks at a time, and were restricted to base. And I use that word quite deliberately because they were typically military applications, and they just didn't want the public to know what was going on until they finished the test. And even then, they didn't necessarily want the public to know what was going on.
All the secrets behind launches. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia. What are you most looking forward to at the Apple event?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, we'll keep this one pretty short. We are going to talk a lot about that on Wednesday. So Wednesday, the second hour, is all about the Apple event, not just the content, both the way we cover Apple events. It's not just the content, but it's the production. So what do we think? We think that it's going to be a record, play out. We don't expect any live. So if we see any live, we'd be surprised. We think it'll be still the same kind of thing we've seen in the past. I expect to see a phone. I definitely expect to see a phone, expect to buy one 10 days later. At 5 o'clock in the morning while we hammer on the button. And I still think that Apple should flex and just say, we're releasing a product that has 4 versions, and you could order it now, like a week before the event, and just sell out. just sell the, like, if you already know that you just want the most expensive thing that we have, just push the button and just see how many. I think that would be a really interesting flex. That we're not going to tell you anything about it. We're just going to have you sign it. I think they could do that, and I think that they would it'd really mess with people's minds about marketing.
Go ahead, Jason.
It would be the greatest Wall Street stunt in history. You would watch Apple stock just go whoosh, and then it would probably go down, but still, it would be a truly fantastic marketing ploy. I am very much looking forward to basically the same thing as last time. More dots, better dots, more structured dots. That's it.
And Bill.
And with the space theme, I just don't think Alex has told us that the Office Hours space crew has been absorbed into Apple, and that's going to be their big announcement. I'm just saying, I might be wrong, but I'm just saying. The space thing is interesting. I'm thinking, wow. So is there maybe some sort of SATCOM thing? I don't know.
Light.
Low light?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. Okay.
That's a good guess. Let's see what Harshit has to say.
So I'm looking at it from the accessibility standpoint. They usually just have one event during the year that they either say features, but this is a hardware event. So as an accessibility approach, it'll be cool to see where they take it, or you have the new watch, perhaps, that'll do a lot of things. So accessible viewpoint.
Yeah, they've definitely beefed that up over the past few years. So looking forward to that as well. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Is there any better audio routing for iPad OS 16, or is it just more of the same, looking to use Bluetooth earpieces with wired mics?
Go ahead, Jason.
Can't speak to that, at least not until after the event, other than saying USB-C can already do this. I mean, any class-compliant device will absolutely allow you to split. You may need to use Bluetooth that is not on the iOS device, but it will absolutely work.
Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. How would you set up an all-remote Zoom meeting with 12 participants where you want 3 panelists, same, to be on a supersource talking and responding to the other people's audio questions in real time? Assume an ATEM Mini Extreme at one panelist's location.
Alex?
Yeah, so I think that what you would want to do there, I think this is a pretty good example of how you'd want to use Zoom ISO. So what you'd probably do is have Zoom ISO go in, grab those 3 panelists, take it out into a production, bring it back in as an attendee, as a panelist. So that ISO solution. So you'd have all your graphics in that, but it would be basically a Zoom ISO delivering those 3. So I would probably do it with A computers. You could probably do it on the Mac Mini with only 3 people, a Blackmagic Duo. So that'll be 4 outputs. So you have up to 4 people. Then those will go out as SDI. You can then push them into a new ATEM with a ATEM Extreme SDI. You could convert it to HDMI. There's not a lot of cards that do high density HDMI for whatever reason, and so you'd want to do the SDI out. Into the ATEM, probably something that has SDI in. Then you produce your show and make that a panelist. And then the only thing, again, I think that what you'd end up doing is putting them into a breakout room. So they're not actually in the same room. They're being a breakout room. That panelist would be in the main room with the audience. And then they would see all of that in relative real time.
Go ahead, Jason.
So that would basically, Alex, are you basically saying that it would be like like an aux loop, but with 2 ATEMs?
Well, there'd only be 1 ATEM that you would need to do this. So it's exactly how we're running the show, except that we're running the show as we're going from one event to another. So we're basically we're in a breakout room and we're sending that video out to a webinar. Next week, we just got 1080p. So on the office hours one. So next week, people will be able to stay in after hours, and they will be able to. So you'll be able to stay in after hours, and we'll just be able to have a room that you can go into to watch office hours, and one of those participants will be the show. And that show is coming out of one switcher. It doesn't have to come out of 2. But we will be, the panelists can be in one breakout room and the audience can be in another breakout room. They don't have to be in separate areas. You can't have the panelists and that return be in the same room. Otherwise you'll hear an echo. That's really would be very awful.
What's interesting about this is how that audio, how they're bringing the audio in. So the panelists are responding to like a radio show, like we're watching a radio show. Does that sound right?
You could. I was thinking that so if you wanted them to respond, you would have to, you'd have to feed that in, and that would have to be a mix minus, and that would be complicated. But it'd be something I think that by the end, I think that there's a way to figure that out, but we'd have to play with it a little bit. Yeah, for them to actually have a two-way conversation, we'd have to figure out the audio there.
It would be easy enough. I mean, with an ATEM SDI switcher, I mean, it'll automatically return a mix minus if you wanted to.
So,
the audio is coming from two different places, because it would be it's mix minus is one thing, but then you'd have to have if they're talking to everyone, we would have to then have a way to pull everyone but that return back out to the,
which is why I was saying two ATEMs.
Yeah, but I think that I think the ATEMs aren't the problem. It's the audio mix. So we have to,
Morgan says, doesn't the breakout room solution limit panelists hearing participant audio?
By design, right? Only one selectively you'd hear at a time.
Yeah, we should bring this back up in a couple weeks.
And this is a great use case, Morgan. Yep. So let us know.
We'll play with it.
All right, next question.
Next one comes from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Is there a way to use PowerPoint on an iPad with embedded music to work in a Zoom meeting? I tried yesterday, but failed.
Any thoughts there about, so Tony, you're on, let's see, Tony, if you wanted to kind of speak to what happened, and then we'll get to Alex.
So what I ended up doing was bringing in another computer to run the PowerPoint. So that was successful. The issue is trying to use an iPad because of cost. The community that I'm working with is not going to buy a computer to run PowerPoint, but they would do it on an iPad if I could figure out how to do it. And it would play, the PowerPoint would play, but the embedded music would not play when I was doing the PowerPoint.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. It's kind of I know people will get into this thing like they don't want to pay a little bit more for something, but wow, this is going to be painful. Like just to let you know that, the most basic Mac Mini or now I can't remember what it is. It's Courtney will talk about it, a PC, a little PC that's probably the same cost or less than an iPad will do the job, but I wouldn't try to do it out of an iPad. Like it would be like that's just going to keep on being problematic.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, what I do occasionally, if I have to do a rig like that, is use the iPad to play back. The audio from that presentation is still going out the headphone jack, so you can do a simple 3.5 millimeter stereo out from there into something that will go into a tiny mixer, and even one of the $20 mixers online into one channel, and then have your computer output going into the other channel, and you'll be able to mix back and forth between the two and embed audio from your iPad into the stream going out. That would be probably the simplest and cheapest way if you have the iPad already. Just a thought.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I'm confused. I wasn't sure whether you're bringing the iPad into the Zoom meeting as its own user, or whether you're feeding it through the ATEM. If you're using it as its own user, there's a setting that you should probably check that has to do with silence system notifications under screen share. And maybe if that is turned on, that may be silencing your audio from your PowerPoint if it's coming in as a member to the Zoom meeting and you're doing a screen share with it. If you're bringing it in over an ATEM or something, then, as Bill said, bring in the audio from the headphone jack into an audio input on the ATEM and make sure that's turned on.
So, Tony, was it coming in as its own user? Is that how you brought it in yesterday? And then we'll go to Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to follow on to what Bill and then what Courtney said, which is I've done this, but I just take a short 3.5 millimeter patch cable and run it from the output on the iPad into one of the mic inputs on my ATEM, and this enable that mic.
And Jason,
Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I brought it in through the ATEM, and
But did you turn it on?
The volume was on, but it would not. It would show the presentation, but where the embedded music was, it would not play on the iPad. I could not get it to actually play the music, but it would play the presentation with no issues at all. It looked fine, but the part where the embedded music was in the PowerPoint slide, it would not play it. I can only get it to.
Yeah, I'll play with this later this afternoon and see if I can figure out exactly how I recreated it.
Tony, was it playing back any sound at all? Did the regular presentation, like, was there any voice or something like that was coming through? Did you know you had audio coming in from PowerPoint?
Prior to.
I was playing music through Apple Music, and there were no issues on the same iPad.
Yeah, but that's a different app. Apple Music would be a different app than PowerPoint. What I'm trying to figure out is, was PowerPoint feeding audio into your system successfully at one point, and then when the other sound started, it stopped? Because that would be a different diagnosis.
Yes. That would be the question. Is PowerPoint the problem?
Right.
PowerPoint on the iPad the problem?
Yeah. Let's go
My
to Courtney.
guess is that it was PowerPoint.
One question I'd have for you, Tony, is how are you getting the video image out of the tablet into the ATEM? Because usually, if it's an adapter that plugs into the Lightning port and then goes to an HDMI signal, the audio should be coming in over the HDMI port for that particular input into the ATEM. So you need to check that and see if that audio is coming in over that audio input on that ATEM input. If you're in the ATEM software, you can check the audio input on that ATEM and make sure it's turned on. That would be where you would hear the audio. If not, then you would have to use the headphone outputs. But if it's like Windows, anytime that you plug in an HDMI output into a Windows machine or a tablet, it will detect that HDMI out if it carries audio, and it will switch the audio output to that HDMI output and carry it along with the video.
Okay.
Yeah, Tony, there's a lot of feedback from some of our producers in the comments, so it might be helpful to also go back to see some, this collective, the power of office hours, panelists and the producers giving feedback on how to solve this. And going back, it might be a PowerPoint issue more so than your workflow, but we look forward to hearing how this gets resolved. Next question.
Michael Smith in Silverado, California says Insta360 event is happening on September 8th, 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Experience magic in action with our next camera. So it looks like a promo here.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm really interested to see what they do with resolution and frame rate. I think those are the two big things that would be, and light sensitivity. Those would be the three big things that I'd be looking for out of those cameras. They seem to be hitting on all cylinders right now, so it'll be interesting to see.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Again, in this case, he says, I am corresponding with Nick Bolton, the CEO of Simless and maker of Synergy, about a fix for what caused Alex to thump, i.e. hose or wipe out, an entire Mac by moving a hard drive from one Mac to another Mac. Are there more details? For example, what hardware was being used?
Go ahead, Jason.
Alex should be first here.
Right. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so it was a Mac Mini M1, 8 gigs, and a 2017 iMac. I don't even think it was a Pro. It's not a Pro. It's just a regular iMac. Anyway, so it was between there. I wasn't trying to move a drive from one computer to another. I was just moving it to the edge, and it went a couple pixels over the edge into another, in between the two, and then that's when the Mac Mini stopped working.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think he created a circular reference, like a symlink, almost an alias, and that's really what tanked it. I've got to say, this is a perfect example of office hours kind of probably saving me from doing the same thing. I really like Nick, and I've given him and continue to give him money every time he asks. I love the product, and I love the depth by which he is integrating these things. And also, this is one of these bad is stronger than good things where if it hadn't happened to Alex, it probably would have happened to me. And I proactively got rid of it.
And the fix is just not to allow it to move drives. Like, I think there's a way to turn off transfer, between computers. And so that's all. The fix is there. It's just don't do that. But I don't have any PCs here anymore. So I'm just using Apple's tools now.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace again in Austin. I just joined something called Polywork, and he's got a link there, polywork.com. And is this actually a worthwhile social network?
Go ahead, Alex.
I think new social networks are kind of hard to sell now. I think that's the biggest challenge. It's kind of like, I'm going to start a new railroad in 1920. Like, it's kind of like, okay, we figured that out about 40 years ago. And so I think that it's going to be hard to get new social networks up to speed, given the ones we don't even like the ones we have. And I don't think that they're necessarily disruptable at this point. I think it would be hard to find another thing that you'd want to add more data to.
To Alex's point, you would need to have a really niche audience that helps the groundswell with that and not worry about getting to the masses. I think I signed up for Polywork. This looks familiar, and I'll just leave it there. So to Alex's point, exactly. that it's really challenging. So, yeah. But thanks for bringing it back. I might go check it out later, Paul. Thank you.
I think I just saw it. I was like, well, I have a social network that does a lot of this. It's called LinkedIn. And so I kind of was like, I don't understand what would make this different.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question, Jonathan Mikkelsen in Buenos Aires, Argentina says, I'm running on an M1 Mac Mini as a headless Zoom client and trying to load a Birddog NDI PTZ as its webcam. Is there a way to automate selecting the right source in the NDI Webcam tool? Companion is installed if a programmable action would help.
I want to say come back for IBC on Saturday when we'll be speaking with them. But and if Guy is out there as one of our NDI specialists, Alex.
Yeah, occasionally, just keep your eye out. Occasionally, we get folks from Zoom on the show, and again, what Liberty said, we have IBC coming up. There probably is going to be a lot of talk about there, but occasionally the team comes on. Save that question and bring it up when the team's on, because I think they'll be the best ones to answer them.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. So I'm a big believer in keeping the crew happy, but I had an odd crew request for chocolate chip bagels. That has me scratching my head. Do you toast them? So you have a recommendation for an on-set toaster that can handle this delicate task?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right, so I had to Google this one because, wow. The way to toast a chocolate chip bagel is in boiling water. 15 seconds, you drop it in, it heats up the chocolate, and there you go.
Go ahead, Alex. You can use it in any toaster, and let me tell you, it is fantastic. My kids just got little ones. You can just throw them in the toaster. They're just fine, and they'll just toast up. Everything will heat up there. You don't need anything special for them. They're very good. They don't get that gooey. They just have chocolate to them. So they're pretty tasty. I don't think they're as good as a raisin bagel. But the raisin cinnamon, cinnamon raisin bagels, I think are the best in that area of the non-everything, kind of half sweet bagels, but they're pretty good.
Blasphemy. No, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I would avoid putting them in a vertical type toaster. I would put them in a toaster oven where they lie horizontally, because if you put them in a vertical toaster and it gets a little too hot, the chocolate could melt and run down inside the toaster, and it create a gooey mess and attraction for a nice colony of ants living in your toaster later.
And Bill.
This is office hours. We over-engineer things. So what you need to do is get one of those small canisters of liquid nitrogen with a really, really fine thing. A lot of the facial surgeons use them for removing small things. And what you want to do is individually super freeze each of the chocolate chips and then put it in the bagel toaster and figure out the amount of time where it's going to toast the bagel and just bring the chocolate chips back to room temperature. That is how you do this.
And if you do go with Courtney's suggestion of doing a toaster oven, sometimes those ovens come with trays. So just to help the gooiness and what happens after, some wax paper should help keep everything nice and tidy. Next question.
+1 on chocolate chip bagels. Yeah, Jonathan Mikkelsen, excuse me, again, is back from Buenos Aires. Did anybody try using a P2P, peer-to-peer, low-latency solution like Sonobus or Fairplay.io for third-party audio in Zoom? Then you can have everyone in the same room having the switcher client work as a sound hub on top of being a video hub.
That sounds very interesting. Let's see what Alex has to say.
It could totally work. You could even use Unity for that. I mean, you could use Unity and have everybody, talk into it and pull that audio and put it back in and set it up. Your problem is going to be sync. As you start to play with all of this stuff, getting it to sync back with the video could be a challenge. You'll need some kind of delay to make that actually work. But it could work to have it. You'd basically mute each person in the panel, and then you would have them use either Unity, Sonobus, Fairplay. So that would actually work. You'd be able to put it back together and stick it in, and it would work. It'd be a little weird because you would see them in the thing, and then you'd see them in the show. I guess if you spotlight it for everybody, I guess you wouldn't see that. But it'd be a little. I think it'd be a little weird to do it that way. But it would be possible. They would theoretically hear the person again. I think that the reason we don't use techniques like that generally is because unless you have, we all have a very complex pipeline here, in this panel, because we do this all the time, and we're media professionals. Usually when we bring people in that are not media professionals, asking them to add a second app so that their audio can run in a separate place so they can talk through it is very confusing, and they have a hard time getting their head around it. And so unless you're controlling those computers on the far end, we wouldn't usually ask a civilian to try to do that.
You have to pop in because I mispronounced it. We're talking about Farplay, not Fairplay, and our friend who has come on the show is
and
fabulous.
I followed it
so we
along.
don't want to. We don't want to mess that up.
Farplay.io, which is an incredible application, and I highly recommend checking it out. FAR, not FAIR, FAR play.io.
And then just the idea around the low latency. So some possible use cases, is this where you're in an environment where from the internet perspective, that you might not get the data that you want to push through?
This would solve the loop problem that we were talking about. This would be, your audio wouldn't be in the same system that it's running. I think that relatively soon there'll be better to do this than what we're talking about here. So I wouldn't go too far down this R&D, and I'd probably see. I'd probably wait a little bit.
Yeah, to see what else is out there. Mm-hmm. Courtney?
Well, one thing to consider is you'd have to do mix minus on everyone somehow, since you're mixing everyone together and then delaying that mixed output to go back into Zoom to sync up. Then you're going to be hearing yourself back if you're monitoring that mixed output on Zoom to hear everybody else. So that would create a problem because you're going to hear yourself delayed somewhat because the delay is going before it goes into Zoom, and then it's coming back to you. And without mix minus, because everything is mixed together, Zoom won't have a way of creating its own mix minus because it's dealing with a mixed signal rather than your isolated signal, I think.
It's a good it's the right answer. So Jonathan, is Jonathan going down the right path. I think there's a lot of technology moving around right now. So I would just wait just a little bit.
Keep your eye on this space.
Yep.
Next question. Okay. And go see John Tepfer's show, Dan Tepfer's show. It's fabulous in our archives. Jonathan's back again with this one. I have panelists and hosts talk via Sonobus. Production manager picks up that audio and feeds it into Zoom together with production video, adjust the audio delay as needed. Also takes audio from Zoom and feeds it to panelists through Sonobus.
Yeah, I think that they'll hear themselves at a delay, and it'll be messy. I'm trying to do this right now, but you don't have to wait very long.
Let's go. Next question.
Cindy Drozda in Erie, Colorado says, I want to use my iPad to do live streaming. Is there a gimbal made for the iPad, and any reason not to use it?
Alex?
Oh, that would be That'd be big iPad. There is a gimbal that will handle an iPad. It's called a Ronin. So the Ronin has enough weight distribution that you could use a Ronin, one of the larger, so the DJI that makes the DJI that makes the, I'm trying to get better about that, but DJI that makes the drones and the small gimbals make a larger gimbal for heavier cameras, and you should be able to find a way. You might have to add some counterweights and so on and so forth, because it would be a very odd thing. But I bet you it just needs to know what it's dealing with, and you'd be able to get it to work. But I wouldn't do that. I would use a phone. I wouldn't use an iPad to do that.
Bill?
Yeah, +1 on that. And I would be concerned because if you're using it outside at all, an iPad is a much better sail than a phone is. So anything big like that, I would think even if you're just moving around, it may not have the stability if there's anything other than completely calm conditions. So just a thing to think about. And Jason?
Yeah, I mean, the Ronin, you took my answer. The Ronin will absolutely do this, but you're going to hate yourself for it. You'd be much better off with a cage or like a mellow-mount, something that'll allow you to two-hand and just, kind of manually stabilize it.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alex Forty Golner, our friend in London. Do you hope that in-person events like IBC and NAB will return to the levels of in-person attendance that they had back in 2018, 2019?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I would hope so, and there may be hope on the horizon because we don't really know yet. The new multivalent boosters, vaccines are coming out this week. I'm going to be becoming a guinea pig for those. And so hopefully those will do better at blocking the spread of the Omicron virus, which is the BA1, BA2, which is the main bugaboo that's going around in common events these days that everyone's catching. At least it's not quite as deadly as the previous versions. But maybe if there's a lot of success in that new vaccine and they may adopt that as a requirement for attending, that you be boosted with a multivalent vaccine. So that might make it a little safer for everyone. So it maybe allow us to go back to attending these giant events without the fear of contracting some type of virus.
Go ahead, Alex.
I mean, a lot of us got sick for a long time, at most of these. So there was the convention croup that a lot of people would get, which was usually some version of a cold or a flu or something. And so I think that it's not particularly new. I mean, COVID's new, but these are there. I don't think they're ever going back. I don't want them to come back to the same levels. Physical events cut out 99% of the world, well over 99% of the world. The people who can't get visas, the people who can't afford to get there. And because they exist and because they're somewhat successful, it means that no one puts any effort into including the rest of the world. And so I think that I'm keen to keep on working with folks to build the technologies that will make these obsolete. And I think that we can. I don't think that they'll go away, but I think that in 10 years, seeing an event larger than 20,000 people will be very rare. Because the largest audience is going to become online. We didn't have that technology. We had to come together and do all these things 10 years ago. We're past that. These technologies are going to get better and better and better. And I'm already talking to clients who used to go to these events. They're not going anymore because these are big booths that aren't showing up at CES and NAB because they just said, it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like it's cheaper for us to rent out a venue and some meeting rooms and some conference rooms than it is for us to put a booth there. And there's kind of a chain reaction. There's less people, so there's less, ROI to do the big booths, and that chain reaction starts to unwind. And so you're going to continually see smaller booths, big vendors stop going over time. And I mean that's I'm already talking to the folks that are not doing it because I'm working on projects, So I think that we're going to see that the numbers get smaller and smaller. The other thing that I think can happen though is you may see distributed events. I mean, these are events that happen all over the world that may have 20 or 30 or 40,000 people, but they are happening at the same time, but not happening in the same place. So NAB may someday be in 20 cities at the same time, as opposed to one. And I think that that's the Again, that's what the kind of technologies that a lot of us are working on make that possible, is to break that up. And so, and that's far more efficient in a lot of ways than what we've been doing up until now.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to start by saying, everyone kind of has a whole bundle of these somewhere. I love trade shows. I met Alex at NAB, and on the class basis alone, the class exclusion basis alone, I think that they need to go the way of the dodo, slowly or quickly, but they need to go.
And actually, I posted a link in the chat that just was circulating about, they're saying roughly 65% is where event attendance is right now. And as has already been shared, I think that it's definitely going to get lower. And we already have examples of like TEDx. Sometimes when they do their events, they'll have multiple ones going on in various cities. And there may be like the keynote that then everybody streams in and they see like there's certain elements that are a staple, but you have those local connections. So to Alex's point, we may see more of that type of event structure happening. Alex?
Beyond COVID, the next thing that you're going to see that people have been talking about for quite a while is carbon. Conferences are going to have to publish the carbon impact, they're going to basically have to talk about the environmental impact of their conferences. And they're going to, and environmental company, they've been giving everybody space to get through COVID, but I guarantee you they've been talking about this for years now. And they're planning to if you don't publish your carbon impact, they'll publish it for you. And that's a estimation of all the flights, all the all the travel, all the other things that are going on. How does this actually impact the environment? And as things get more warm, more heated, this will become a very heated discussion about that. And so fundamentally, we have to realize that if you're throwing the ball to where the receiver is, conferences are going to go away. And because they're not going to be able to survive the number of different inputs number of different challenges they're going to get all at the same time. So they'll be down to much more intimate events that have a much larger online presence.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, how can we make sure those with disabilities and challenges are treated on an equal footing in our work with those without?
Courtney, real quick.
Well, real quick, there's the ADA. So you have the law on the side of the disabled. The ADA was the Americans with Disability Act. It's for those of you in the Americas, enacted in 1990, I believe, and it covers anyone with disabilities, physical, mental, or otherwise, and employment, and in the workplace, and in public, and access to public places, et cetera. It only applies to employers with 15 or more employees, so that's a consideration. If you're disabled in some method and you're looking for work, look for an employer that has more than 15 employees, and they will have to abide by the laws of the ADA. And there are just reams and reams of lawyers, almost as many as there are personal injury lawyers out there willing to pursue any case involving the ADA.
Go ahead, Bill.
Challenging because each person with a disability is a unique individual person. So I don't think, you try to make rules to treat everybody equally, but I really want to treat people individually. And that always means that me as a person interacting with them has to be open to what that individual person needs and to try to get there. And sometimes it takes a little time. I mean, I know in my interactions, I have not been perfect when I walk up, and I try to learn and pay attention. But to me, that's the core, is if you're treating everybody individually, which kind of goes against this idea of there's one set of rules that will always work for everyone. Just interact with the person first, and then let them inform you how much of the disability is important to your interactions.
And Tony.
Everything that's already been said, with the caveat of continuing to have conversations, continuing to ask the questions, Douglas.
Next question.
Next question, moving on. John Snyder from Reno, Nevada is up next. Thinking about the various AI-enabled art generation tools that are coming out, is there a use case for using these tools in the storyboarding process, or are they just not there yet?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so there's a couple different opportunities there. I think that are going to be really interesting. But the main thing is that it's hard to get it to do exactly what you want. So framing and blocking are difficult. But if you want a couple different versions of something, so for instance, Dolly, you can give it a storyboard. It'll build 6 other storyboards that are similar to that. And so you could play around with ideas there. I think that it's really interesting for concept art. So what I think is interesting is when I've done a couple tests inside of it where I ask for something and I get back something that I would have never thought of. And I go, oh, we'll talk about this on Friday. I would absolutely use, to get out of your, already, your own filters. I think it's really interesting for concept art, but storyboards, it could take a little time.
And Courtney.
Yeah, what would be great is if you could enter the 3D scans of your sets and 3D scans of your actors and just load those in and then load the script in and tie the actor's name to the characters they're playing and have it generate storyboards for telling the story as it works its way through the script would be very interesting, wouldn't it?
It would be interesting. It might get to that point, at least like a first draft. It just goes, oh, this is how this, and then you could type in director Quentin Tarantino. And then it would just build it as a Quentin Tarantino movie or Wes Anderson. And it would be a lot less camera angles.
And you'd have an amount of violence slider that you could slide up or down.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
We come up with some very creative solutions here on Office Hours. And now that we make this transition to the top of our second hour, we're going to get into a discussion about RFPs, requests for proposals, and the sales process. A lot of the time when there are questions coming up from you, our producers, around sales and how to get certain kinds of clients, well, the RFP process is one of those ways, especially if you are thinking about making either a transition to working with government agencies or nonprofits, or there are some larger projects or agencies that for whatever reason, there's some stipulations where they have to actually put out a bid. If memory serves me correctly, in North America, for most government agencies, anything over, I think, maybe $3,000, $5,000, they actually have to put out a bid so that the community is aware that there is a need for a vendor for a project. And these are just some of the ways that there's so much opportunity out there. So I thought that this would be a great topic for us to dive into. And if we can pull up that example of what an RFP looks like, because it's a document that they would put it out, and sometimes you would want to be a part of a portal if you look at your state or your local agencies and you want to get in on that. So whenever they have this information, which includes the background, the scope of the project, what they're looking for, but then also how they are going to choose. Like, that's one of the most important things, is how they're going to select a vendor. And just in this document alone, and I can drop a link to that as a sample document for you to look at if you've not seen an RFP before, that it just with that breakdown, it explains, okay, so if it is, let's say it's an interactive project that they're looking for, I think that's what this one is, where it is, they will weight your experience with social media, your experience creating content, your experience, and they weight it 20, 30, 50, there are various numbers. And those are just some of the things that you want to really pay attention to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward when you are applying to an RFP. And there's kind of, when you're looking at it, just as a quick visual, when you are thinking about when applying for an RFP, from my experience, been submitting to RFPs for roughly 7 years, and I also worked at a government agency. So I've also been on the other side of when these RFPs come in, that you really want to look at, well, what's the checklist? So I think of it more as, what are the requirements for the project? And that's where you look at thoroughly look at the RFP, find those sections where they're asking for what your qualifications are, and then create your own checklist. And most RFPs, they're almost the same. So once you put in that legwork and do the heavy work of doing your first one, a lot of that information is going to be transferable to other projects. You just pretty much would change what the requirements of that project are. You would change how you respond to those types of questions. But your company information, your in the US, your EIN, like that information is all going to be the same, and you just transfer that over. Also, you want to give yourself enough time. So often people think, you see an RFP and they usually give you, depending on when they put it out, you almost have 2-3 weeks, even up to a month, because they understand how exhaustive that is. And there's often time where you can submit questions. You look at the RFP, you need some clarification on what's being asked, or you see, I remember there was one we did recently where they had set a particular budget range. And we're like, well, are you sure it's going to take that many hours? Are you including weekend hours? So that gives you an opportunity to just ask some clarifying questions. And usually there is some sort of portal they might ask for you to be a part of so that everyone can see all the questions. So again, giving yourself enough time to look at the RFP, submit your questions, and to actually look at the RFP. And then the last one I would say is budget. And if you kind of look at this as just as a triangle of the three fundamental things when you are going to submit an RFP, of putting those at the top and building around that. And I'm confident that the panel has some comments around just even the thought process there, but just at a high level of looking at when you are going to complete an RFP, like those are the things, especially if it's your first time doing that, some of the things that you want to consider and think of. Harshid?
I wanted to ask you, actually, you brought up some points. You said you were on the other side, on the, let's say, governmental side, and dealing with vendors specifically. Let's just say equipment-wise, as I am need equipment sometimes, and it gets expensive, and I've gone through, let's say, 3 vendors, and that's money that 3 vendors have probably gave an RFP for to the government agency to say, hey, we have this product and, this is what we have to offer. Or is it the other way around? You flip it where the government is the one has the budget, has the components that you're talking about, and then the vendors are adhering to the governmental entity. So could you kind of help me kind of clear that picture of what that means? And I guess RFP is a contractual document, in other words?
Yes. So great question. And I'm happy that you asked that also, and being on the other side. So typically this request is coming from an agency, whomever that is, as I shared, different ones, like whether it be government, their nonprofits, whatever their stipulations are for how they find someone to complete work needed. So if I use an example of the one that we just had, is that government agency said, hey, we are redoing our website, and here's what we need. So typically the communications team has put together what they think that they need. They have an idea internally of the budget that they want to hit for this. Oftentimes you won't get that number. So that's why I put budget as one of the tenets to that triangle. But they know what they're looking for, and they've outlined. So this is a document. The RFP is a document where they're saying, this is what we believe we need. Here are the people we're looking for. Here's how we're going to judge, the judging criteria to select someone, because the idea is that it's supposed to be, there should be no bias in that. And that's why this document is put out. That's why questions are put out publicly, so everyone gets the same information. Is that along the lines of what you were needed clarification on?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Bill. No problem. Bill?
In a perfect world, that all works. And the world is pretty imperfect. Right. So just a couple of notes. I've seen RFPs that were clearly designed from top to bottom to get to get a result that whoever's putting out the RFP wants. And I'm reminded of architecture where, an architecture will say, well, I want a product that has function A, B, C, D, E. And you look at it for a while and you go, oh, they want the Acme 5000. They've set up the criteria to specifically aim you at that product because that's what they want in their system. I've seen requests for proposals that really were surveys, that they're really saying, we don't really want to do this work. We want to look out there and find out who the competitive structure of the world is. And so I always participated in them when I did RFPs and tried to be as honest as possible and the rest of that. But I always had a little bit of an eye toward, when I wrote this paragraph, what were they really looking for? Is there something soft that I'm missing in just reading the statistics about what they're trying to get done? And sometimes the whole document in that way will give you a hint as to the approach that they're looking for. Even in the best circumstances, when I've been on the other side of the table, it's interesting, you're thinking, oh, they really just want the best price. But I've run into circumstances where the discussion around the table is, are they too cheap? Is there any way they can do this job at the price they put in? And I've seen people say, we need to be in the middle of this range. We're going to dump the 2 on the bottom and the 4 at the top, and we're just going to look at the 3 in the middle. So there are a lot of subtleties to this. It's not always just cut and dry in my experience.
You make some excellent points there, Bill. And just if we want to say like the dark side of the RFP process, where sometimes they are just trying to see what the industry, what those standards are, which is where you really want to wait carefully when you see an RFP, read through it, see, like, do they know what they're really talking about? And, is this so tailored that they already have someone in mind? And just being very frank, again, Bill, for bringing that up, thank you, that they have someone in mind. So is it really going to be a fair process? I do want to bring in John Snyder back to Harshit's question. Says an RFP is not a contract, but accepting a proposal that leads to complete the contract. It's a description of agreed upon work to identify a single vendor and work through the contracting process. So yes, so the RFP is not an actual contract, but it is you submitting and saying, we can do this work. The agency saying, great, we select you to do this work. And then there's paperwork process that has to go through that, because there are some RFPs, depending on the size, where it's okay. They're going to, it's like buying a house, going to make sure, do you have all of your licenses? Do you have the insurance? All the things that you said. So there is a period of due diligence before that contract is awarded. And there are some times where it is that they find out the person is, something happens on the back end and they have to put the RFP out, or once they announce who they've selected, that they have to publicly say, we're about to give notice to this vendor that we've accepted their proposal. And then you can argue against that. I haven't seen too many people do that or win those things, but it's a part of the process. Let's hear from you, Peter.
Well, I was actually between this and the next question, which was the difference between the RFI and the RFP kind of question. I mean, Bill, you were talking about sometimes, particularly government agencies will say, I've got this thing I'm thinking about. And so they'll put a few things down on paper. The procurement folks will put a few things down on the paper, and they'll send out a request for information to the industry, to the relevant industry. And we'll all respond back with, we think this is what you mean, and this is how we would answer the question. But we're always very careful not to respond back with pricing and things like that, because that just gets us off. But they're looking for the art of the possible. RFP is, they're really looking for something. Now, you're right. Trust me, I have been on the sales side prior to RFPs being issued, and we do our darndest to help the procurement folks and the actual internal customer figure out what's the best way to write that RFP to aim it right towards me. I mean, and Liberty knows, she's been on that side of the table as well, where the sales guys is. But the other thing you have to watch out for in RFP is sometimes there's one line, and I personally have experienced this, that everybody missed. And it could be a technical requirement. So we had, this was about 20 years ago, we had a really complicated bid from the federal government. But in the end, there was a one-liner that says it must be compatible with FIPS 60, which is a Federal Information Processing Standard 60. And if you didn't know what that meant, you answered the question, you answered the bid wrong. So it's up to you to very carefully read everything in that bid and make sure you understand exactly what they're asking for. And by the way, when we responded to that bid, 2 of the responders got it right, 5 got it wrong, and were immediately disqualified. So that's the key thing. And you can get disqualified for lots of things, right? Both in the RFI and the RFP process, they will often ask for what are your corporate qualifications or your company's qualifications, including financials, because they want to make sure the responder is financially capable of doing the work. So if you're if you're working off of a $5 checking account, probably not a good answer, right? But lots of things like that. And then when they get down to the actual response, very often they'll ask you to name names if it's a services contract in particular. So names and resumes will have to be included. And if your maze bright, the resumes will be slightly tailored to match the RFP.
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't think it's never, but I've almost never bothered with an RFP that I didn't already know I was going to get. So like I just find it to be a waste of time. If I don't do blank RFPs generally. I usually have somebody who, again, as been stated before, oftentimes will tailor things that at least the floor is leaning my direction. So and a lot of times and we do that all the time too. When we do stuff, when we're buying things, we work with some government agencies and some other governments around the world where they require a triple bid, which, I consider stupid. Like, I just think it's something that financial people came up with, and they don't know anything about production. And so it's kind of one of the dumbest things ever. Like, maybe not the dumbest thing ever, but pretty close, because it completely doesn't take into account that things need to actually get done. And what you end up with is companies winning RFPs that are really good at doing RFPs. They're not actually good at doing production. And so that typically is what people, organizations that actually do it without talking to anybody, without having it leaning one way or another, really don't know what they're doing, and they're hiring a bunch of people that are good at paperwork. And what they get is kind of it's not that it fails, it's just kind of a mush. They just, and there's a lot, probably 80% of the corporate and government work out there is mush because of this process itself, and so a lot of us, within production, we hotwire it, and so we will put in things in the RFPs that we build, for a government program or for whatever, that would be impossible for anybody else to do. like there's one company that can do everything, and we say everything has to be here. Like, you can't take one piece out. It can't do this. It can't do that. We'll put in things like, if we have to get cameras, we'll say it has to have this many connectors and this many. Like we get very to a point where there's no way you couldn't buy the camera that we wanted, and so we can get really specific without naming the brand or naming the company, and make sure that there's just no way to get around it. But that's the only way you can short circuit a super painful system that was not thought up by anybody who actually wanted to create quality work, and so that's, so generally the RFP system is somewhat corrupt in the sense that people who actually want to do good work tend to short circuit it all the time.
And I'm going to jump to Bill.
Well, a couple of things, and it's not about that specifically, but I will say that I look back fondly at my early ones because it did teach me a lot about what a structured organization looks for. And there were things that at that point I hadn't encountered, your insurance requirements, whatever it is. There could be 10 different things. And by going through a structured proposal, it really helped me understand how these larger organizations would look at things. Also, you got to remember that, let's say you've never done a website before, so you put out a request for proposal for a website, and you're sitting there going, I don't even really know the language of that industry. I have not spent time around people who design websites. So they can be talking HTML this and this jargon that, and I'm not even going to have a sense of what they're talking about. So the gathering of information so that you can speak intelligently and understand the language of an industry is one of the functions that I found myself going to these RFPs and trying to think through the process. It really did help me. So I considered them in my early days a training device as much as anything. Let me try this. I'm probably not going to get it, but at least I'll start to understand how to talk to people who are going to be speaking this proposal language. And it really did help me later on when I had to execute contracts with clients and things like that, because I was steeped in the language and knew how to talk their talk.
That's a really good strategy. Jason?
I always thought of a request for proposal almost like a if an organization were to be, requesting employment, right? So, if you look at a want ad for a job, what you'll see is you have to have this degree and this certification, and then you draft a resume that says this is what I've done before, and then you put on a cover letter that says I'm really good at this and I want to highlight that. On an organizational level, that is essentially what you are doing. You are proposing your organization for the task at hand. And yes, to Alex's point, personally, I don't bother with ones that I'm not pretty much certain that I'm going to get, because it is so much work and it is frequently for nothing, right? I personally, for me, it's almost like 60% of the job is just wrapping my head around the job. And that is so much work. It is hard to overstate how much work that is. So yeah, there are federal requirements, and sometimes, municipalities will also have, you need a certain number of bids. And what it to me is the guise of fairness, but it actually is just the opposite.
Yeah, those are, like you said, that each municipality or government agency has their own stipulations. And yes, it is a lot of work. There are some, again, having been on the other side, there are some larger agencies where they have a team that is dedicated. So they constantly do this. They understand, they have all the documents prepared, but on the other side of it is the reward of getting 100,000, 200,000, $500,000, $1 million, multi-year contracts. So you just weigh where you fall in that spectrum. Peter?
So the other thing to keep in mind is not to muddy the water too much, but most state governments, so most municipalities have to adhere to the state government procurement laws. And federal government procurement laws are even more insane in many cases. But most state governments also have already passed legislation to have pre-approved limits and their lower limits to say, if they need somebody to come in and design a website, we think it's in it, and they say, we the state believe that it's going to cost on average $200,000 per website. They've already pre-stipulated that number and said, anybody who can come in, anybody can bid on this and get that work. Now we just go into what are the requirements for the company, not what is the price. If you want to bid $200,000, you're good to go. You don't have to actually let an RFP out to make that happen. You can go straight out to the vendor and hire them and be done with it. Those are nice. Those task-based authorization procurement laws. I guess, Alex, you and I would agree to disagree, because there are certain cases where you need that forced competition between some of the large vendors. And I'm not thinking of what we do here and what you do, but when you're building hardware, you try and avoid cost plus contracts. You try and avoid cost plus. I mean, because do I have some secret sauce that I can pull out and answer this bid with, is really what you want.
And just adding to, I just wanted to pull in quickly a couple of the comments. So Bob Studevant Bob, hopefully I said that correctly. When answering, he says, when answering an RFP, only give them what they ask for exactly. For example, mail it, do not deliver personally. He's seen how this has caused the company submitting not even having their response seen. And that is a very important point, because going back to how they weight the RFP, there's a point where it will say, like, if it must be mailed or how many copies you have to deliver. I remember there's one where I had to submit 3 copies and it had to be hand delivered. And by missing those types of lines, that's an automatic 0, like they will not even accept it. So you just want to be mindful of those things, having a checklist, like before you even go into the process, reading it through and creating a checklist of like this must be done, to just save yourself and to make sure that you take care of those elements, because it would be a tragedy to just have all of that work go for naught.
I know the way to the State of Texas Department of Information Resources building really well, having delivered 20 copies of a 200-page RFP response to them.
Exactly.
By the way, you get to know FedEx Kinko's really well too.
And these are all ways that they just are weeding out. Can you pay attention? Can you follow instructions? It might seem monotonous and meaningless, but that is, if you have 100 people responding to an RFP, you end up only getting maybe 20, Alex?
Yeah, and the way that you end up being on the inside curve of an RFP is that you build relationships.
Yes.
Like that's like, so the thing is that's, why you tend to want to have a lot of relationships with a lot of folks. And a lot of things, one of the things that I find fascinating is some people will be like you call them to ask them some advice, and they'll be like, am I getting paid for this or consulting or whatever to give you an hour? I give my hours all the time, like to clients, to partners, to everything else. You want to throw something up. I always tell them over and over and over again, the best thing to do is to talk to me when the idea is brand new, and when you don't know exactly how it's going to be formed. The worst thing to do is to come to me after a bunch of people who have never done live production have come up with a crazy scheme that isn't going to work and isn't going to even be that good. And then they just want me to bid on how to do something that, really could have been much better for a lot less money. And so the best thing to do is to talk to us early. And I just go, just call anytime you want. I got an idea of what would be possible here, just spitballing. And you want to spitball with people all the time, because it helps exercise your mind as to what might, just because one person's thinking of it, usually it means it's coming somewhere. Like when someone starts thinking about it and talking about it, it's going to happen in the world. And that's what I found. And so it's just a matter, and then it gives you time to kind of think through it. But you build those relationships where you're the one that kind of designed that process for them. And then there's much more likely that they just want you to do it. But I don't do it as a sales product. I just do it that's just how you build relationships, is to brainstorm with folks.
And Bill.
But don't charge for consulting, like for an hour of someone's time. Like that's a great way to stick with small jobs.
Correct. Bill?
Unless people think this entire process is always just an insider game and things like that. I have been involved in things where they've done the process just by the book, and it's had a great result. In fact, I was on a hiring committee once for somebody who was going to run a program at a public radio station. And we went through all the candidates and we picked our recommendation, said, we recommend you hiring this person. They hired that person. I found out later, talking to the director of the division, that they really, 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 really wanted a different candidate. And, she got the job and stayed there 30 years. And so I don't want to give you the idea that unless you're an inside tracker or something like that, you have no hope with these things. There are all sorts there's a spectrum of how formal or informal, by the book, or because we want this result, this can be. And not trying means you will never get through that next stage and become one of the people who are on the inside. So always try, never hurts.
And Bill, you made a great point, is that you don't need to go into these on your own as well. You can find some partners to strengthen your application, because at the end of the day, you're trying to put your best foot forward. I've been where I've partnered up with other folks for an RFP. And again, being on the other side, I've seen other agencies come together. There was the web dev shop, and then there was the marketing shop, and they came together and they won the bid. They just had to explain. Everything is about explaining how you're actually going to be able to complete the project. And we'll wrap with Jason, because I see all these amazing questions piling up.
All right. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Alex is dead right that it is a terrible idea to decide to put up walls immediately. And it's an even worse idea. Like, sometimes RFPs are thrown out because somebody wants a salesperson to push their job to them, right? And instead of really understanding something, and it's like, well, just let the sales guys do it. You can get the presentation, the Google pushed to you. As a rule, I absolutely will talk to anyone about anything, and as long as I feel like it's useful. And it's important to never stop that. But yeah, just be mindful of your own time and your profit margins.
Correct. All right, Bill, let's get to these questions.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada has our first one. What's the difference between a request for information, RFI, and a request for proposal, RFP, and how should somebody approach submitting each?
Go ahead, Peter.
All right, I saw my name disappear from the question, so I thought you. So the real basic thing to remember is the I stands for information and P stands for proposal. So an RFI, if the procurement authority is doing their job correctly, and it's something new and different that the organization is looking for, they're just going out to industry and saying, what are your capabilities in this general area? That's all they're asking for. And be upfront. Don't talk about money. But talk about your capabilities. And it's kind of like what Alex was talking about earlier. Is it's a somewhat more structured method for calling a bunch of people up and saying, what do you think? Because I can tell you there have been a number of times when I responded back to RFIs and says, you've got to be out of your insert expletive mind. Maybe not in those exact words, but that was kind of the 10-second version of the 50,000 words I responded back why this won't work. And in that, believe it or not, the procurement authorities find those kind of responses helpful, because that will go back to the internal side of the businesses. What were you thinking of when you asked us to do this? The RFP, on the other hand, is in fact, it's very structured. They want the proposal to come back, all the questions asked, not just about the technical aspects of what they're asking for, but about your company, about the people you're proposing to execute the work. Resumes inclusive, the finances, both of your company and what kind of money you're talking about. You better have sharpened your pencils when you do that. And we can have our ongoing debate about the value of those under certain circumstances. I'm not, I'm really open. Don't understand this industry and how it works. I do understand hardware development RFPs, and and services, large data center operations RFPs. And, you're talking about the state agency or the state spending a lot of money, and they want to know how their money is going to be spent.
Right. Next question.
Bob Sturt Event back from San Antonio saying, what is your strategy to train companies from not dropping RFPs with a 2-day deadline? I try the good, fast, or cheap pick 2 technique, but not much success.
Go ahead, Bill.
Again, I'd be reading between the lines and saying, why, that's crazy. Sometimes it's they may be facing some requirement, right? Some executives said, we have to do this and we have to do it this weekend. And so they're going to slam out an RFP and figure out who out there does enough of these so that they can get some boilerplate back to them in time to get at least one good candidate to do the gig. That's a possibility. The other thing is that you're dealing with one of those people who already knows who they're going to hire, and they're just technically checking the boxes. Did you put this out for RFP? And you can go, yes, I did, even though I still hired who I wanted to. There's all sorts of possibilities. I mean, these are pretty complex generally. So it is pretty unreasonable to expect any organization to turn around a full-fledged RFP in a couple of days. It also means that they're not doing a lot else if they're going to successfully respond to that. If they're a busy company, the kind of people you want to work for because they've got a lot of clients going on and they don't have a dedicated division to do this, that would be a red flag to me.
Yes, that's what I was going to touch on, Bill, is the flag. When they don't have that short window, it's like what's happening behind the scenes. So definitely be mindful of that. John Snyder in the comments says, consider working with other companies if you can, so that you can piece the work, divide and conquer if there are those short timelines. And if it's consistently a certain agency that does this, then you just know that's the way they operate, and just having your documents in order. Like we have folders that say what kind of, because the grant process is almost similar to the RFP process, like having those folders prepped and ready, that you have all of those staple requirements ready to go, so that you really are only spending your time answering their questions and pulling the appropriate sample work or documentation together. Peter?
Well, the other thing I would say is, particularly when you're dealing with Liberty, I don't know what state you were working with when you were doing on the procurement side, but I know in Texas, it would actually be against Texas procurement laws if it was a state agency or a municipality. You have to give 30 days notice.
Oh, very neat. That's good to know. Jason?
Yeah, I don't think those laws exist in New Mexico. I'm just going to say that. But no, Liberty, I'm glad you brought up.
They do, Jason. I've been in New Mexico.
Oh, okay. Well, they're not followed. Whoops, I didn't say that. Anyway, I'm glad you brought up grant writing, Liberty, because I actually have found that my degrees are in psychology and business, and I had to learn how to do grant writing as part of the psych degree. I found that was much more useful than any of the junk that I learned in business school. It's bizarre, but it is just freakishly true that the ability to read behind the lines and between the lines and backwards to really kind of figure out what somebody's asking for, to me is more similar to a grant than it really is to a technical requirement. I'm sure that depends on the vertical, but yeah, it really that's how it felt to me.
Great point. Peter?
Well, and going back to the 2 days versus 30 days comment, one of the things that, you do it once, but one thing I will say, because I've seen it happen, is somebody issued one of those, well, actually it was a 4-day turnaround on a RFP. It got awarded, and we all kind of knew how it got awarded. And then it got thrown out in court because it was protested because it violated the state procurement laws.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. If you were going to pick anything to sell that would have the most chance of success, what would it be?
It's seeing that we are on office hours. I'll throw my hat in, and production and marketing. That's an easy one to, especially since everyone needs content these days. So yes, that is what I'd be responding to RFPs about. Peter?
Well, being somewhat flippant in the way Paul asked the question, Girl Scout cookies.
Good one. Jason?
I think the Girl Scouts of America have that on lock, but I've always thought that a really great way to make pretty good money, at least in the tech sector, would be find a proprietary database, figure out how it's being integrated into a system, let's say, some sort of industrial design system, a metal chopper, some sort of thing that bends parts, and then figure out how to use a Raspberry Pi to make that process easier.
Next question.
Marty Adius, Maryland, the U.S., says, oftentimes RFPs ask for design and idea details, which require work that is typically billable. Where and how do you draw the line?
Ooh, good question. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, first of all, it depends on the size of the RFP, because I can, I've bid now, and then these were data center kind of things, but we've bid on $1 billion contracts before, and we, the design engineers who were helping prepare the bid response, were given a budget of hours to bill against the RFP, and that cost is then buried back into your bid response. So you'll recover the cost over the life of the contract one if you win it. But it is basically marketing costs. It's basically covered as marketing costs. I mean, sometimes it's been, $30,000. Sometimes it's been $1 million. It depends on the complexity of the technical response you need to do.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, this is delicate. It is very delicate. I had a couple of circumstances in my career, the most poignant of which was we did a presentation for a large office building complex, and my art director had done a really, really great logo. At the end, they said, well, I think we're going with somebody else, but would you mind if we use the idea for the logos and stuff like that? And we just looked at them and said, yes, we'd mind. This is creative work that we, you buy it or you don't have it, period. And it has nothing to do with the proposal. And there is a lot of if you're doing creative work. Now, in the ad agency business, that's such a big deal, right? The creative is really what you're selling. I know you're going to make most of your money on media billings and things like that, but that's what distinguishes you from the operation down the street is the quality of your creative. So there actually was a trend in advertising for a while that pitches would be paid, that you would have a budget, and to get large organizations to come in and present and develop creative was something worth money. It's kind of fallen out of fashion. I don't think it happens as much anymore, but it is important to draw those lines because this is what you're selling. It's like if you're billing for your time, you can't give away your time for free. It's your product. And the same thing with creative.
Go ahead, Peter.
The other thing I would say is we always had IP lawyers crawl through our responses to make sure we weren't giving away the farm with the response. Because to Bill's point, there were a couple of times where in doing our technical work, we were actually answering the question, but we were answering it to a level of detail that somebody else could have picked it up and replicated it. And the answer is no, can't do that.
Yeah, and you might also, because this also falls into when you're applying for a job, and especially in the design community, when they ask you to do like a full campaign, being mindful of who those companies, employers, and or agencies are, where you decide, no, this is not something I'm going to do. And or some that I've seen that have done a really great job is that there's levels to it. So the first part is making sure that you have all of the requirements that they're asking for. The second part to the RFP or you have to actually present the work. And then that's typically where it's the top 3 candidates. So that is a little bit different where it's not looked at as they are trying to get everyone's ideas. So just being mindful of what you respond to would be a good way to look at that. And as it has been already said, just say no. Next question.
Deborah Woodfork in Washington, D.C. says, as a vendor, how do you use a DEI? And I'm wondering, I looked it up, maybe that's Disability Equality Index, lens in the RFP process with a client.
I believe it's probably diversity, equity, and inclusion, possibly.
Okay, thank you.
Possibly that one. And thank you for bringing this up, Deborah, because I was thinking as a possible future second hour, just someone who could possibly help speak to that area a little bit more. But what I have seen is that organizations are they're finding DEI specialists and or consultants who then help them to determine, well, when you're putting out an RFP or what a vendor, here are some things that you need to check off that list outside of the normal ones. So that's what I've seen from an observation standpoint. And I think that definitely finding someone who can come and speak to our community could also help in how you look at that. And when it comes to vendor selection. Alex?
With government contracts, it is important to understand who's actually doing the work in those areas. So one of the things that is a resource that's often used in government contracts is a minority-owned small business is super valuable to big companies with 3 letters. So anyway, that have massive contracts. So big companies have massive contracts. They are required to have a certain amount of it go through small business and minority. And so what happens is that these folks build these little companies up that don't do anything. They get past. Now, sometimes they do, and it's great when they do, and they're getting those opportunities. But you do want to look at where that's actually happening, because they're oftentimes just used as little chips to kind of manage the process and get it done. Yeah.
And Peter.
I was going to say the exact same thing. You know, we always maintained a list of small and minority-owned businesses, and we'd have little notes that go with each one of them. Are these front companies, or are these really doing the work? Because we really wanted to use the ones that were doing the work, because federal and state contracts often have a line in there that says, as part of the procurement laws, you know, you have to have so much percentage of small and minority-owned business as part of the respondent. It just has to be there. You don't get a vote.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Sales question. If you're selling a product on commission, what would be your minimum return? For example, 25% of the profit for each product sold?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would discourage this kind of myopic thinking unless you're really just kind of in for quick money. You can't put a hard, fast line on something like this. If you were selling them by the million, for example, it wouldn't really matter what your profit margin would be. It would be your potential for bulk. You need to be more specific, I think, and you shouldn't. I would try not to box myself in like this.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's too applying a metric like percent of profit. Now, almost anybody in business who understands their industry will have profit margin targets and calculations. But obviously, if you're selling a $30 million helicopter, 25% of the profit might be way out of line. And if you're selling, a set of lawn chairs for $50, 25% of the profit isn't going to do much anything unless you're selling a lot of them. So it's just too variable to, I think, pin down with a number.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. I've seen this happen. You create a comprehensive RFP and the client picks a simple, incomplete RFP from the competition, who then charge them for all the stuff you had in there that they left out.
Go ahead, Jason.
Good riddance.
Yeah, as we shared, there's an upside to this, but then there's also the dark side to it, and the experience too, because there is oftentimes so much turnover with that procurement team that sometimes you find someone who's learning the ropes. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate when companies allow themselves to be taken advantage of. We see this all the time, where someone will come in with a low bid, but they left a bunch of stuff out. And the issue is that the RFP didn't. This gets back into being only saying what the RFP is asking for. Is the RFP is not asking for all the things that you know are necessary for that job to be executed. The RFP is asking for what they knew to ask for. And so someone will go in and they'll answer, "This is all you asked for. Here's your response." But you can't actually do the show at what you asked for. And so then once they get the job, then they say, "Oh, by the way, you're going to need all these things." It's going to be another 30% more. And those are, again, this is where people who are good at RFPs oftentimes get those jobs when they're actually not already kind of leaning towards somebody.
Peter?
I guess first of all, I would agree with Jason's good riddance. That's, I personally had a bid underbid by 2/3, and they obviously went with the lowest bidder, and they learned their lesson. The client learned their lesson the hard way, because 2 years later they had to recompete, and we won, right? Because they were getting nickeled and dimed to death and not getting what they wanted. But it's, sometimes the procurement officers have a hard lesson they have to learn, and there's no way out of it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Go ahead, Bill.
Very much along the lines of what Peter's saying, one of my biggest bumps in pay for the work that we were doing came when a client left us looking for a cheaper solution. And it was such a disaster that they came back and our rates doubled. because they realized what they would have been getting before and the value of it. And so this is just the process of growing up in business and understanding that you're not going to be perfect at doing bidding and proposals or anything else when you first start doing it. You have to pay attention to the lessons, understand feedback, talk to your clients, talk to your peers, talk to everybody who you can to figure out what you don't know about the game you're playing and then get better at it, because that is the process.
And Alex.
And the other thing is don't always assume that you should try to be the lowest bid. I came in for a pretty large project. I mean, more than $1 million project, twice the next bid. This is, so it was twice the size of the next bid down. What was different was I had an enormous amount of experience in doing this type of event. B, I put together a great proposal, a great deck, that did it. And they gave the same thing in a sales order. So it was just like, here's a sales order of what it'll take to do it. So there was no vision. There was no images. I was explaining to them, I was painting a picture. We're going to build this. We're going to do this. Here's all the graphs. So here's flow charts. Here's how we're going to manage. The other company didn't know how to, I don't think they even knew how to do that. They didn't even know how to do the job, so they came in at, again, half of what we came in. And so sometimes it's in addition to the RFP, it's a slide deck if you're allowed to submit one. It's a slide deck that really outlines how you're going to execute it. And usually the way I execute things, it would be very hard for someone else to do. Like if they saw the slide deck, it wouldn't matter.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back in. This case he's asking, I've heard in some cases of RFP responses and other large government documents delivered on an encrypted portable hard drive or SSD and not transmitted over a network. Why could that be?
Go ahead, Jason.
It's really hard for me to speak about what you've heard. Anyone who kind of requires this doesn't really understand the way that encryption and largely math works. It is very cool. It's very mission impossible. I have even played with doing this, with delivering things on encrypted SSDs to clients, just largely because I thought it was cool, and more often than not, they don't.
And Peter.
Well, could be cool, but sometimes I have done it to certain 3-letter agencies, which absolutely will not let that stuff go over the public internet, period.
Next question.
Next question comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. How do you indicate and include the cost of maintenance and our ongoing support when completing an RFP?
We don't do as much web development as much as I did earlier on, but just you have some historical data that based on time and hours. And I think a couple weeks ago, just sharing, like having a spreadsheet where you're able to quickly put those estimates. So if you have some kind of document where you can estimate that time, and then this is where you get an opportunity to, in your language and how you respond to, based on this RFP, we estimate XYZ, and putting that information in so that you're also covering yourself as well. That's one of the ways that we've done it in the past. Bill?
Oh, there's nothing to keep that from being part of the RFP. The RFP may specify maintenance and ongoing consulting or whatever. And so if that's one of the things they're asking you to bid on, you have to come up with, what you think running a system like this will take in terms of support after the sale. It's not always there, but it never hurts to, if you think that's going to need to be included, you can decide whether you want to build on just building the thing and giving it to them and walking away from it, or an ongoing relationship and make that part of your proposal.
Good call. Peter?
So this is an area that was near and dear to my heart for many years. We used to do a thing where we would classify 3 types of support, or 3 types of projects, if you will. And you'll laugh when I say that. All lowercase project, we gave them an annual ongoing all lowercase project support bill. Said it'll cost you, I'll make it this up, $100,000 a year. You can spend it any way you want. And we'll keep track of the hours, and you'll understand it. If it was greater than $100,000, if the estimate came back greater than $100,000 to do the piece of work, but less than $500,000, then capital P project. And that was when we would have to have written authorization with the design before we would proceed further. And then there was all capital project, and that was a contract amendment. That was a contract amendment. And that was, typically $1 million or more of change. Now, as Liberty can probably guess, I was dealing with probably larger things and doing web design here.
Right. We're covering it all today, covering it all. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back in this time. He says, has there been a simplified RFP process that small businesses and sole proprietors can more easily participate in?
That's a good observation, Douglas, because we have been speaking about it from a general perspective, but that's where you can look at, well, maybe we're not going for federal, we won't apply for a federal one. Not that I'm making any deterrence, but if it's someone who is maybe a solo, as you said, a sole proprietor, maybe looking at some of the municipality projects and then you determining which one you would go for, looking at their specs, because all of this information, when you get an RFP, all of the information is, as much as we could ask for, the information is in that document. So you just determining your capabilities, especially if it's something that you're just starting out to do. So I wouldn't say that there is like, here's low hanging fruit, but you can look at that as going through those proposals and seeing which one you want to start with and get your hands. Because once you get your hands dirty, then you're able to then scale and see, oh, we won this one or we didn't, but we got feedback. And that's a great point right there. When possible, if you do not get an RFP, typically they give allowances to get feedback. And that is probably the most invaluable part of the process because that will help you learn. I remember there was one that we went for and everything else was great. It was probably one of my first RFPs and it was just a budget thing. So that was helpful. So all the other documentation was on point. So really, it would be you as the business person applying for it. I would say, go ahead, Bill.
Well, also, request for proposal is kind of a formal document for larger scale operations. A regular proposal doesn't have to have all this, and you may not get a request for it. I mean, the whole beginning, when I started doing work for what became my largest client, I was doing proposals, but they were just off the cuff. They weren't asking for them. Somebody in the organization would say, hey, can you do this kind of work for us? And I go, yeah, let me put together a proposal. And it would be entirely generated by me. And it might be 2 pages. It might be 6 pages. It was just based on the complexity of the idea and what I thought was necessary, and they would either approve it or they wouldn't approve it, and we'd go on from there. This more formal system tends to be in larger organizations with more money at stake, but I probably spent my first 10 years just doing that, proposal, accepted proposal. I do a scope of work that was kind of the pre-contract outlining exactly how much time and effort I would put into it for this much money. Occasionally, I think I've talked about this before, occasionally I would do a line item quote if somebody in this was really wanted to drill down, but I tried to avoid those at all costs. And I did hundreds of projects on that basis without this formal process being involved. So it's not required. It's the client and the scope of the project. And so what somebody on the other end is going to, how formal they want to be in terms of a formal request for proposal and a competition.
And to tie a bow on that, John Snyder in the comments just said, part of his comment is smaller customers will likely have smaller RFP requirements. So again, just looking at the customer that you're dealing with, and that would help in making sure that you find something that might be a little bit easier as you get started with. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Brea, California. In a large organization, there are often RFPs sent out to other divisions or arenas to compete with outside vendors. How are those best handled, and should they be transparent with the outside vendors?
Real quick, Peter.
Well, I'll share a story with you that's about 30 years old. The FAA put out an RFP for what was called the interim update to the en-route air traffic control system. And IBM had built the original hardware back in the early 60s. And so IBM Federal Systems Division bid on it, and so did Lockheed Martin. The irony is, to respond to the bid, both had to come back to the same laboratory. And we actually had to, with the strict adherence to the lawyers, had to set up 2 separate Tiger teams. We were not allowed to talk to each other about each other's bid. And that was the only way we could keep things sane. And yeah, you have to let both parties knew that the people in the lab were working on it because of going back to the same hardware lab. You had to let them know.
And Bill.
And sometimes it's just a matter of building relationships. I mean, we started with most of the companies, we started with doing maybe training work. And then, Jane in training will talk to Tim, who's the division manager over in sales or marketing or something else, and go, hey, give Bill and his people a call. He'll come in and take care of this. And next thing you know, you're working for a second and third and fourth. And then you get into the circumstance as that to silos in companies. And some people not, no, he's mine. I can't give him to you because I want all his time over here. And this whole thing gets complicated. You just have to wend your way through and do the best you can. Try to be as loyal as you can to the people who got you where you're going.
Excellent point. Next question.
Marty Adius in Maryland says, is information you put in an RFP protected by copyright? Is it considered intellectual property?
Go ahead, Jason.
The short answer is it depends. If you're doing it right, it really doesn't matter. If you are comfortable and fluid in your topic and your area of expertise and what you're bidding on, to Alex's point, there are great ways to hotwire that, then it doesn't really matter. And I would never pursue a copyright claim on anything that I would knowingly give to another person.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, trying to even bringing that up will ensure that you won't get the RFP. like even saying anything about that, asking for those things. If you think that it's something that's proprietary or secret that has to do with you, then don't put it in the RFP. You can say it in a different way. You can show less detail. Again, what I do is I build what looks like very detailed documents that are accurate. But if you actually follow them without the other bits that I left out, you'll have a really hard time. So I leave out enough information that you couldn't take it from me. But that's something that's kind of a skill and a dance of how to submit lots of detail that does say that you know how to do it and you have a plan without providing all the secret sauce that would be required to actually execute that plan.
Go ahead, Peter.
If you recall earlier, I made the comment about we always had our IP lawyers looking at this stuff before the response bit back because we didn't want to give any of that information out, like Alex said. The closest we ever came is we had a reason that we could literally put down, here are the 15 patents that IBM owns in that area. And but since those are publicly available information, here's the list of the patents. You want to go look at the patents, feel free.
And Bill, real quick.
Your most valuable asset in business is your reputation. If you get a reputation as somebody who takes somebody's intellectual property and gives it to another client or acts on it, your reputation gets damaged. And boy, let me tell you, in that example I gave earlier where we did the logo and somebody said, can I use it? And I said, no. If they had shown it in the paper, I couldn't have had any real legal recourse because there wasn't anything formal about that. But I would have let everybody in the industry that I know that client had done that. And I would do it quietly over lunches and things like that, because we have to stamp that kind of thing out. This is my work. You don't get to do whatever you want to unless you pay me for it, period.
Next question.
John Snyder, Reno, Nevada. How does the RFP process change between government and private customers? Any tips on how to handle each?
Go ahead, Jason.
In my experience, government work is follow every checklist. It is a true, real, rote process. Whereas with private customers, at least I have found there's a lot more, you have a lot more leeway and a lot more freedom to say, here's one way to do it, here's another way to do it. Let me help you define the box, and then we can talk about it.
And for our final question of the day,
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. What are your chances of success selling on Amazon, eBay, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Walmart, or your own website?
Well, if you put in the work and find a product that someone is looking for, then I have a number of friends who have been tremendously successful with Amazon live shopping, websites. This could be its own month-long topic, second hours of essentially e-commerce selling. But yeah, there are people who are making bank out there, Bill.
Yeah, each of those places have their own level of traffic. So the question is, how much traffic do you need to put your product in front of it to successfully get a sale? Are you selling more than one thing? Are you selling a product? Or are you selling just a thing? I want to get rid of my motorcycle. And that should give you an idea of the market you need to expose it to: local, regional, national. What's the cost? What's the potential return? And how big a market do you want to address?
And Jason.
Like anything else in business or life, you will get out what you put in.
That's a great way to end today's show. Thank you so much to our producers for your fantastic questions and comments. If you are watching this, go back to the comments. There are lots of great nuggets in there. And to our panelists, thank you for your feedback, insights, and stories. And of course, to our production team, for without which this could not be possible. Thank you all. Remember, as we head into after hours, that we will be testing Zoom ISO for there's a 2-hour window. So that will be happening all week. And if you want to learn what's happening during the schedule this week, head over to officehours.global. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
And Mitch isn't here. We can whisper a lot.
Whisper.
66,000 miles, almost 67,000 miles. Maybe one more question would have got us to 67,000 miles.
Does anyone know what the record is?
I think it's in the hundreds of thousands. I think.
Oh,
One day
wow.
we go, yeah. So it was relaxed. We just didn't run as many miles. We're not a 1K. We didn't get 1K out of this. 1K show, 2K.
Felt the jet lag.
Right.
Oh, the record is 254,000 miles.
Wow.
Is the terminus with you, Alex? And can we calculate what the farthest point across the globe is, and then find a panelist?
Mickey and
Mickey in the Philippines is great.
Yes.